So we now come to the discussion of cash poor firms. Cash rich firms are firms that have R, the intermediate cash flow, larger than the maximum repair cost rho star. And for cash poor firms, it's the opposite. There we have the R smaller than the rho star. And that means that the cash, intermediate cash, is at least under some circumstances not enough to repair the machine. Okay, R smaller than rho star. We can just without more or less without loss of generality concentrate on the extreme case that there is no intermediate cash at all. Okay, so what should the entrepreneur do? What's the optimal contracting choice in that case? Well, one thing that we could try to do is just choose wait and see. That would be the easiest thing to say, okay, just finance my project, and then at the intermediate date, uh, if the machine breaks down, I'm just going to try to get more finance. Let's see. There's no liquidity planning in advance. So I have to do something, for example, issue new shares or issue new debt, whatever. But the original investors have to be diluted. If I want to attract more money, that means if I want to issue new claims, that means that the old claims get less valuable. There's some dilution effect going on. So what is the maximum amount of money that I can attract at this intermediate date? Well, that's, of course, I can never attract more at that point in time than the pledgeable income at that point in time. The ex ante pledgeable income is something else than the intermediate pledgeable income. Okay. So how much money can I pledge at the intermediate date? Well, only PH times R minus B over delta P. If the machine is repaired, then this is the amount of money that I can pledge. Okay, so I can never attract more money than that. That's the maximum amount. But because we have assumed that we are in this intermediate case, in the interesting case, let's look at the picture. Oh, I'm always going to the wrong direction. Look at the picture again. We are in this case. So therefore, the rho star is between PHR and PH times R minus B over delta P. Oh, I just see that the P is also missing here. Oh, I used the rubber at some point. Here also the P is missing. B over delta P. It's always B over delta P. So it's in between. So am I going? No, I'm going to the wrong direction again. I shouldn't click so much back and forth. Here's the slide. Okay, so the rho is in between. We know that because we're in the intermediate case, in the interesting case, and that means that the maximum liquidity shock rho star that I should be able to withstand is larger than the amount of finance that I can attract if I don't do any liquidity planning in advance. So that means I have to do something already ex ante, not just at the intermediate date. And what could that be? It could be a line of credit, or it could be just hoarding liquidity that I just try to get extra liquidity right from the beginning in order to survive the liquidity shock. How much liquidity would that have to be? Well, it depends. If I if I get a clause in the contract that I'm not allowed as the firm to dilute the shares, so I'm not allowed to issue any new debt, then I would have to put aside exactly the rho star. So that would mean that my investment volume or the balance sheet total would be I plus rho star. The I would be the initial investment, And the row star would just be some liquidity reserve that I can use in order to repair the machine. If I don't have that kind of clause in the contract, then of course I'm able to produce to attract more cash at the intermediate date. So then the amount of cash that I already need from an ex ante perspective is the difference between the rho star and the pH times R minus B over delta P. Because pH times R minus B over delta P is the amount of money that I can attract. So I just have to use the difference as liquidity storage. Okay, with the line of credit is exactly the same. The size of the line of credit would have to be exactly equal to rho star. Okay, so these are the two different alternatives. One of them is no rights to issue new claims at date 1, borrow I plus rho star right away at time 0, or organize an according credit line. Or I do have the right to issue new claims, but then I have a smaller credit line or a smaller amount of cash. So which of these three different options I take is not clear. Just one thing is clear, that credit line alone is sufficient. Hoarding cash alone is sufficient, but wait and see and issue new shares at the intermediate date is not sufficient. So you can use either only the credit line or only cash hoarding, but you cannot use only the wait and see strategy. It always has to be combined with some of the other strategies. Okay. One thing that's important is that this credit line must be non-revocable. Well, that's would be a question that I would typically ask in the classroom. Why does it have to be non-revocable? Well, if the bankers that grant the credit line could just at the interim date say, no, sorry, I've changed my mind, or sorry, I don't have the cash myself right now. I don't want to give you the loan. It would always do so because uh, because we know that the amount of money that the maximum amount of money that the banker would have to pay to the entrepreneur is rho star. And that is more than the pledgeable income. So that means that from the banker's perspective, this credit line carries a negative interest rate. He makes a loss with this credit line. So why should any banker engage in such a behavior? Why should any banker be willing to enter into a credit line where they make a loss in expected terms? Well, it can only be the case if the banker is compensated in some other terms with the other part of the contract. So that means the original long-term interest rate must give him a positive profit, so that the negative profit in case that the entrepreneur draws on the credit line and the positive profit, if he does not do so, they cancel out exactly. Okay. And they do have to cancel out exactly because that's the way that this rho star is calculated, that the outside investors exactly break even because the pledgeable income is exactly equal to I minus A. Okay. Right, two more points that I can discuss. The first point is the renegotiation. So the contract that we have in equilibrium is renegotiation proof. And that means that there is no way from the contract to arrive at some interim date at another contract that's better for both parties. Okay. For example, let's assume that the rho, the realization of the rho, is just a tiny bit, let's say €1 larger than the rho star. So what would happen then? Then the entrepreneur could go to the banker and say, look here, banker, if I have the right to draw on my credit line, I can get exactly rho star with the credit line, but I need €1 more. Why don't you just give me this €1 more? Because if you don't, then the project will be discontinued, and then won't see a single cent back. You've already given me I minus A, and you won't see back any of that. What would the banker, that would be a kind of renegotiation. You go to the banker and say, look here, there's a situation, there's another contract where both of us should agree upon. You've seen that from the debt overhang problem. Their renegotiation was possible. Okay, here it is not possible. Why not? Because the banker would say, well, I'm not crazy. I would have to pay you the complete row star, but row star is larger than the pledgeable income, so I'm always going to make a loss. You can be happy if I give you the row star, because the maximum that I would be willing to give you out of free will is PH times R minus P over delta P, because that's the pledgeable part of the income. Okay, so renegotiation is not possible. The second remark is the role played by the uncertainty about liquidity needs. Well, it's just that if the liquidity needs were certain, so if the row was just a fixed number, I mean, then we would know already ex ante exactly how much we would have to store, and there wouldn't be something really like a liquidity shock because there's no shock. If there's no uncertainty, there is no shock because everything is already known. And then the whole discussion would be pretty boring. Okay, right. That's it. I can just say that this chapter 5, I mean, we're just halfway through. There's some more stuff to come, but this basic model, that's one that I personally like a lot. Because the model looks complicated first, but then everything becomes very nice and interpretable, and there's a lot of economic stuff going on. So this is really a model that can be used as a key ingredient in many more complicated models in many circumstances.